May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be aligned with your love, O God, our strength, our courage, and our freedom. Amen. Well, my friends, I think that every one of us who will stand in this pulpit during this time of not being able to gather together might make a comment about how very interesting it is and unusual to be preaching in an empty room to cameras that are broadcasting us all over the place. But I must share with you that just now my imagination went to the congregation as it forms at 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock and 11:15 usually. And as is the case in all churches, there are certain people who occupy certain areas of real estate when they come to church. And so I imagined you all in your places, and also I imagined all of our visitors, and all of it gave my heart great joy. And I am grateful that despite the fact that we cannot be together, we are together spiritually, whether we are doing this in time or you're watching this later. Now, I like to have a word about which to reflect and preach. And today I want to preach on the word trust. It is a word that is used a great deal in that gospel lesson, that lengthy gospel lesson that I've just read. And it's a word that has been visiting my heart a great deal during this time of the coronavirus. Just to clear out the underbrush, let me say that trust and the word belief and believe and faith all are translated from the same Greek word, pistis, pistis. And I prefer the word trust because there's a lot more verb in it to me. We can talk about the Christian faith, and that brings up all sorts of associations that are not having to do with entrusting your life. We can talk about having beliefs, and that brings up issues of kind of intellectual thoughts to which we give assent that have been the case throughout the course of Christian tradition. And I am not using those words today. I want to focus on the word trust. And the question is, how are you and I trusting right now? To what are you and I entrusting ourselves? To whom are you and I entrusting and trusting at this moment? In my mind, it's a very, very lively and important question about what I am trusting, should be trusting, and to whom and what do I entrust my life. Now, I do want to say something about the context of this question. I think I have now entered into this initial and shocking early chapter of our new normal in this time of coronavirus. Just 2 or 3 initial shocks for me that I think have some resonance with you. I had to come to terms with the fact that I am solidly in the vulnerable category of people over 60. Consequently, I have to be especially careful when outside my home. When I'm in spaces where there are 10 or more persons, I must be especially careful to maintain a distance of at least 6 feet between others and myself. I cannot hug and kiss everyone, and I love hugging and kissing everyone. I cannot gather in a room full of worshipers or theater goers or concert goers or diners. And all my meetings that have not been canceled, which must go forward, must be held by conference call or Skype or Zoom. Social media, websites, texts, and email have become even more essential in communicating with St. Luke's and a wide constellation of friends. And sadly, the Italian model, more than the South Korean model, seems more the lot of us in the United States. We all could at any time be in total lockdown in order to flatten out the curve of infections so as to reduce how catastrophically our healthcare system is overrun. So I must learn how to broadcast my thoughts and concerns and reflections through my iPhone and on my new iPhone tripod. And another shock, the toilet paper shelves are still empty in many stores. Now, I consider those initial shocks behind me. And I have had to come to terms with the fact that, shockingly for me as a priest, who thinks that Easter is the central Christian feast, and I now know that we will not have grand physical gatherings in this room to celebrate the resurrection. What's next? Most of the answers to that question are unknown. However, this business, back to my theme of who and what do I entrust myself, has become very, very important. And this is why. This coronavirus will indeed pass. We will gather. We will hug and kiss again. We will gather for celebrations and teachings again. But in the meantime, who and what you and I entrust our lives at this juncture can make a huge difference in how many of us are here and in what shape we are here when the pandemic has passed. I recently listened to a conversation about hope, which is related to faith, as we know. Faith, hope, and love are the three great virtues, or as I'm saying, entrustment, hope, and love. And this interview was between Krista Tippett and Rebecca Solnit. Miss Tippett is the interviewer on the amazing radio show On Being. And Rebecca Solnit is one of the United States public intellectuals concerned about the issue of hope. Her book, Hope in the Dark, about the phenomenon of hope in post-Katrina New Orleans, is a classic. I commend it to you. Solnit is intrigued at how hopeful people often become in the midst of floods and earthquakes and other disasters. Now, before I tell you what she says about hope, she importantly distinguishes between optimism and hope. She says hopefulness is really not optimism. Optimism says everything's going to be fine and we can just sit back. And that actually is too much like pessimism, which says that everything is going to suck and we can still just sit back. Passivity goes with both optimism and pessimism. Hope, she says, actually means a sense of uncertainty, of coming to terms with the fact that we don't know what will happen, and that there's maybe room for us to intervene, and that we have to let go of the certainty people seem to love more than they love hope, because it is not certain. We have to let go of knowing. We have to let go of insisting on knowing what has to happen, what is going to happen. We live in a very surprising world. She says, actually, history is like the weather, not the checkerboard. History is like the weather, not checkers. So in the face of uncertainty, We're called to be hopeful nonetheless, and hopefulness is understanding that there is room for us to intervene and not just sit back. You see where I'm going. In order for you and me to know how to intervene until this thing has passed, we must know what to trust. We are called to do something. Washing our hands frequently, making sure that we have social distancing. All of these things are interventions, and they are acts of hope. In addition to that, we are called to do something. And what you choose to do has no map for the circumstances we're in. So in the face of the fact that unexpected things will happen, to whom do you trust to know what interventions you must engage? In what and in whom do we trust in the midst of uncertainty where the stakes are so high, life and death? Now, I have come to believe that we can trust in the presence of the divine, capital P, presence, divine, in us and in others as a way of knowing what has our name on it, and as what we are called to do to intervene. And during this interim time, we have a responsibility to practice the presence of the divine inside of us. The presence of God is our inner divine light. Be in touch with that light inside of you. Be familiar with its voice and entrust your life to that light. One of my favorite hymns relates to this morning's gospel because it uses the word I've never seen in any other context. I-N-L-Y, inly blind. It comes from Jesus' saying that these religious people who had everything figured out about what had happened to this guy who had been born blind, because they were so certain and loved certainty more than hope, and loved certainty more than trust, and loved certainty more than the presence of God, they were inly blind. And the hymn goes, "Thou who didst come to bring on thy redeeming wing healing and sight, health to the sick in mind, sight to the inly blind, O now to all humankind, let there be light." Paul says in the letter to the Ephesians this morning, "Now in the Lord you are light. Live as children of light. For the fruit of the light in you is found in your ability to do good and the right and the true." Solnit has been reading the same stuff that many of us have been reading here, the Dalai Lama and his love for neuropsychologists. And he is saying that neuroscience is teaching us a very different story than we've had about humanity heretofore. We have been told that human beings are no good in their essential status. And what we are now learning is that what we've been told about human nature is wrong. That actually, human beings are actually very generous, communitarian, altruistic beings whose light inside of them is distorted by the system we're in. And what if we actually can call on that to be better people in a better world, and to be better people to make a better world? One of my favorite op-ed writers, David Brooks, recently wrote, and I put it in my context of what you can trust and what you can't trust. He said, you cannot be a me person in a we crisis. If our fears or our certainties or our dogmas or our doctrines or ideologies or parties or any other identity leads us to be a me person in this we crisis, I am arguing that that is a presence that you and I cannot trust. According to the first lesson, you cannot believe in perception and appearances over actual reality. God has anointed and called new ways of being, not old certainties. So, my friends, on this fourth Sunday in Lent, as we head toward Easter and the inevitability of our getting together again when this virus is behind us, let me call you to the wonderful power of entrusting yourself to the divine presence that is within you and is within everyone else and is also in nature. God is all and is in all. Trust that presence. That presence gives life to the world. That presence is Christ living in you. Christ within me. Christ before me. Christ behind me. Christ in friend and stranger. According to St. Patrick, whose feast day we celebrated this past week. My friend, this is what you can trust in these days. Listen every day, for the divine presence is calling you to make some kind of intervention in this context in which we now live. Amen.